Joe here on the Blue Room. It's Friday night. We're in again talking about Everton transfers, and we should be probably out having a bevy and a nice time. But we are live on YouTube as well this week, so we would like everyone to get involved. Send us your thoughts on Everton's lack of transfer activity, on the players we're not going to sign, on the players we might be signing, on all the rumours this week. Join us a little bit later on. He's a little bit held up at work, but Rob Vida will be on the call very soon. But joining me now is Michael Greenall again. We didn't scare him off, thankfully, last week. He's come back again. How are you doing, mate? You okay?
Yeah, all good. Just waiting for the transfers to start flying in now.
Yeah, it's been one of them, isn't it? We were sort of saying just before we came on air then that even though it's only been a week since we actually last did this show, it feels like ages.
Yeah,
but in the same breath, nothing's happened.
It was only last week. I was thinking before. It's like I swear I said I feel like this time next week we'll have Alan in. We'll be going into our first pre-season friendly, and we'll all be a bit more optimistic with the friendly with the fixtures out. But nothing has happened, has it? We've not even had like a Paul Joyce tweet to be like they're having a medical in 48 hours. None of that happened at all.
No, he put on before, didn't he? Something about Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain getting injured, and I think everyone saw that and thought, here we go. I think a lot of people have got notifications set up.
The notifications come up,
haven't they? But unfortunately, it was about a Liverpool squad player getting injured, not Everton signing someone. But you mentioned it there in regards to the friendly match tomorrow, and I think it has snuck up on a lot of people. It's one of those friendlies, I think, that if people were allowed in the stadium, everybody would be going down to Blackpool, wouldn't they, for the day on the ale. Yeah. Everyone would be looking forward to seeing the players in the new kit and get excited about the new season. But I think by virtue of the fact that it is behind closed doors, that we haven't signed anyone, it's sort of one of them where it's sort of crept up on people and gone, I imagine there'd be people watching and listening to this going, I didn't even know we were playing tomorrow.
Yeah, I always think that, especially when you've got a new manager in, well, obviously he's came in December, but I feel like it's really important to get, because I remember when Martinez first came, we had that friendly Accrington Stanley, didn't we? I think this might have been his first game, and I feel like it's really important to get those local friendlies in, because Liverpool do it every year. They're at Tranmere and they're at Wigan or Blackburn or something like that, and some of the fans who can't always get to go, and I feel like it's a really good way of trying to find the relationship between the new people coming in, and obviously, he's been here 9 months now. We've got no new players to be welcomed or anything. But I feel like as much as always everyone wants us to be over in America or Australia, I feel like the local friendlies are just as important to really try and create a bond. So the fact that we have got Blackpool and we got Blackburn as well, it's a bit gutting that no one's actually going to get to go.
Yeah, 100%, mate. It is one of them. It's one of them where you see your new signings and you jump to immediate conclusions about how good or bad they're going to be, don't you, after everything. Delighted to say Rob Vida does join us now. Are you there, Rob?
I am here. I am operating in a work zone today, so I will probably be on mute as much as possible when I'm not talking. They're hammering away and making lots of noise, but we'll try and fight through it.
But we were just saying there, Rob, in regards to Everton having an actual football match tomorrow, which feels a little bit strange. Obviously, they're playing Blackpool in pre-season, but is it a worry for you that it is the same group of lads going into that one?
I don't know. First I have to get over the fact that I'm just really not ready to see them yet. I'm still pretty mad at them from the end of this past season, which, let's be honest, just ended 3 weeks ago. It hadn't even been a month. So this was always going to be the case where with the extended window and the super short break that there was probably likely we wouldn't have any new players, the second the window opened. And even if we do sign guys, it'll be interesting to see how any of the mechanics work with, I don't know if they're coming from certain countries, if quarantine comes into effect. I have no clue on that, but I'm not really worried. I think I view most preseason, and especially this match coming up on Saturday, as fitness exercise more than anything else. Though, please don't let that sentiment stop any of you from freaking out when we lose or something like that on Saturday. So, but yeah, I'm not too worried about it. I'm not concerned at this point. Give me at least 2 or 3 more weeks before I'm really losing my mind. Maybe 2 more weeks, and then I'll be getting upset.
Yeah, I don't know. It does always feel like a bit of a yardstick there, doesn't it? That first pre-season friendly. I think when you talk about transfers and getting the squad in shape, you want a lot of the business done. I think that the elite sides have a lot of the business done before the group gets together, before they're all back in training. You can get acclimatized for a few days or maybe a couple of weeks without actually having to play games, and it always makes it that little bit harder for new players to come in. And we'll speak about potential new signings in a bit. Just again, anybody who's watching this on YouTube, you've got any thoughts about Everton's transfer business, the pre-season friendlies, anything else, leave a comment in the box. We will answer them at the end of the show and throughout the show as well. But before we get on to speaking about Alan, Decore, and a load of other old fellas that Everton have been linked with, Rob. But no, in all seriousness, I want to speak about Gabrielle Magalhaes, who looks as though he's looked as though he's going to be going to Arsenal. But reports today, Mike, saying that he's going to take another week to decide his future, which is, I suppose, from the lad's point of view, given he's got a lot of clubs interested in him, given the fact that he is somebody who he's going to be moving countries potentially during a pandemic. You understand that, but it makes you realise, and maybe it's credit to Everton in that sense, that they've sort of stepped away from this one, because I suppose in one sense they could have been strung along and kept their iron in the fire, but they've decided to go a different direction.
Yeah, it looks like we've got out just at the right time, isn't it? And it's annoying because as a player, I feel like he'll do really well over here, but I mean, you've seen a lot over Twitter even before it came out that Everton have supposedly stepped away or they've been rejected in terms of like contracts or whatever. But the excitement and the anticipation of the signings kind of just worn off. Because I mean, I suppose this isn't a signing that's been like on the cards for a matter of weeks since it came out of nowhere, and then it's stopped. We've been, a lot of people have been talking about Gabrielle now since February. That's a long time. So the fact that he seemed, according to the Telegraph and the Independent or whatever, all the key sources is that he's Arsenal bound now, and it's only a matter of time. But now today, Manchester United seem to have be thrown back into it. I think what I read was the fella from The Athletic who works on the Man United side says, I'm not entirely sure of any interest. I think it might just be agents trying to work, which it probably is. Unfortunately, whether the players actually got that much say in it. Sometimes agents just really have too much control. But I suppose that's their job, really, isn't it?
Rob, you sort of been speaking about this today on Twitter, I saw, with David Hughes, and sort of suggesting the same sort of thing, that you're quite happy Everton have moved away from this one now, because it does feel as though it's going to get messy pretty imminently.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it sounds convenient to be like, we didn't want him anyway, but that's not really what I'm saying. I think it's a little more nuanced in that. Look, we had, the situation was a particular way in March, both in terms of the player, how far the deal maybe had got along, the need certainly. But think about all that's changed since then, and it's not just COVID. I still maintain that the Jared Branthwaite emergence really helped in so many ways, and it's amazing how much a player that you have. I guess I don't know if we could say we really developed, and we bought him in January or something like that. So, but it's nice when you have a young, relatively cheap option that you've developed in-house for the most, to a degree, that emerges, and suddenly the urgency is no longer there. I think that, combined with Michael Keane, heroically becoming average again, was also very helpful. And I think that suddenly the need is not as pronounced, whereas back in March, we probably thought we were going to go after one central midfielder. We may have thought, Mike Diasha pointed out to me very logically when we talked earlier today, that the club may have thought that Gabaman might be back a little sooner than he's probably ultimately going to be. I've always been skeptical of that because it's an Achilles, and I just think you never know with injuries like that. But I think now that it's pretty clear that the need is for two central midfielders, and so Gabrielle, who by all accounts is a really quality player, just doesn't, the situation's evolved, has changed. And I think where I'm a little bit hopeful, and again, we're all making assumptions based on little breadcrumbs that we can get, is that it appears that Brand's stuck in for as long as he felt like he could, and then thought, well, we've got other needs that have suddenly come up, but we also don't need to continue to waste our bandwidth, if you will, persisting with efforts that are ultimately not going to work out. I mean, that's that's to some degree the mess we got in with Zuma at the end of last summer, where we just kept thinking we're going to get it done and thinking we're going to find a way. And sometimes the most astute thing you can do in the transfer market is to know when you're beat and move on, and or know when other options have come in or the bidding is getting out of control. And the fact that Gabrielle is suddenly the prettiest girl at the ball is certainly an advantage for him in terms of what he may be able to command, or for Lille. But I think that we've walked away and it's probably okay.
Yeah, we've had a question in there from Chris Hammond, which is sort of relating to this centre-back situation, saying reports today that Chelsea are looking at Thiago Silva. I think that has been reported by some pretty high-ranking, well-regarded sources when it comes to Chelsea. It's, around The Athletic and other news outlets. I think The Guardian have ran with that as well today. Would you go back in for Zuma? And in that case, I would. I have to say, Mike, I'm in agreement with Chris there. I think Zuma was somebody who complimented Michael Keane really well. And I think despite the pretty comical poor showing in the FA Cup final, overall it seems as though he had a pretty good campaign for Chelsea.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take him back. I think this time last year, I think a lot of people were probably in denial that he's staying and he's not going to play any games. And if that is the case, then fine, because we'll just sign him in January for 10 million less than you were asking for, I suppose. But, Lampard, I think it was very, inconsistent at times. But, we played a lot of games in the end, and I feel like it's him and Rudiger really seemed to be the partnership at the end.
Yeah.
But I suppose it begs the question, would they actually let him go? Because I suppose if you're bringing in Thiago Silva, similar to Michael Keane, you'll probably want someone with legs next to him. And, Zuma, a very fast centre-back, and that's why he played so well for us, because he made Michael Keane look good.
Yeah, I suppose in some sense, though, Rob, regardless of what happens with all that, there is going to be a spare part of Chelsea there, isn't there? Whether that be Christensen, whether that be Tomori, whether it be Zuma, whether it be Rudiger, whether it be someone like Ampadu who's coming back from a loan at RB Leipzig as well. They have got an abundance of central defenders there. I mean, would you look?
It's got to be tough. It's so tough for them.
Yeah. Would you look at any of those lads and sort of feel as though, because obviously I am very much, I think they are my colours to the mast in regards to signing players from bigger clubs in the league and around Europe. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I think someone like Tomori or someone like Zuma could potentially work, because they are, in the case of Tomori, they are young enough still. And in the case of Zuma, he's someone who's been at the football club, has thrived, and has done it in the Premier League for a long time.
I don't know, guys. That would not be a very creative choice by Brands. I mean, I'd rather us find a nice 19-year-old in the Romanian second division that impresses impresses us a little more. Now, look, I think that in all seriousness, I think that I still come back to the Branthwaite factor, not because I expect Branthwaite to start, being first choice anytime soon per se, but suddenly between him and Gibson, you have some depth there, and then of course you have decisions to make about who goes on loan and those sorts of things. And I guess my question would be, if you let's say that you can get an amenable deal for Zuma. I mean, I think I like Zuma I like Kurt Zuma just fine. But who's going out? I just don't. I guess what I'm saying is that if you think Michael Keane is fine, and Yerry Mina, there's not a market for Yerry Mina right now, given his wages and his health issue. He's got some health issues going right now. I just don't think that they're going to take a giant loss on Yerry Mina, regardless of how some people feel about him. I don't think that they're in a position to take that sort of loss on him right now. So we asked this when we were talking about Gabrielle originally. How much money do we want to invest in that one position to have four pretty senior, level center halves. I think that
if you not answered that, Rob, in the pursuit, do we not know the answers to that because they pursued Gabrielle and were willing to offer around 25 million for him? Does that not an indication?
They were. Well, no, but they were. But that was also before Jared Branthwaite played games for us, and suddenly people started to look at this and think, well, we've got a little more depth there. I mean, we found out, as much as the conventional wisdom is that, you can't play a young player because it'll just crush his confidence. Well, you played Jared Branthwaite and he seemed fine. And if you're telling me that we're going to go into the season with the existing group that we've got now, I feel okay about that. Now, if you want to say there's an opportunity for significant improvement, which is what Gabrielle, potentially was, that's fine. But even in that scenario, I still think that someone is going out. I just think given the needs of the rest of the squad, it's too much money to spend in that position unless someone is going out. Because let's say, again, I'll use that your question there, Matt. I've said before that I think Keane is currently the most sellable asset right now, just given the fact that he's English. He's a former England international. He's got just a couple years or, so left on his contract. He's not young, but he's not old. I mean, there's, he's fit, whatever. Okay. So if you were to sell Keane, then that leaves you with Mina, Holgate, Branthwaite, and Gibson at this point. If you've got, Mina, Holgate, at that point, it's like, are you comfortable with just having those two? Maybe not. But I think I would say that if you want to have one more established center half at that point, then if you're going to sell one of them, then you bring in a loan option. Like a Tomori makes sense if you're going to bring in a young option, because then you can say, all right, well, this is a loan. We'll take a look at the player for a year. Maybe there's an opportunity to do something with them, but it enables you to punt the decision on some players down the road a bit, enables you to send, either keep Gibson and send Branthwaite out on loan, or keep Branthwaite and send Gibson out on loan, or whatever. So I just don't know that big money on 4 center halves makes sense, given we just extended Holgate's contract and so on and so forth. That's just my thought at this point.
What do you reckon to that, Mike? Are there any of those lads at Chelsea it's sort of like Everton to pick up in that regard, even being a loan deal for the remainder of the season? I think if we could get Zuma or Tomori or Christensen on loan and focus the attention on midfield, it feels like that could be quite savvy business.
Yeah, I think if you had to pick, I think I'd be looking at Tomori, simply because I think in like the current financial environment, you're probably looking at a loan and then a permanent transfer. And I think not having to spend money, if you really do want a centre back, is probably the way to go. Whereas if you're looking at Zuma or Christensen, they're probably going to want money up front. Whereas they might see it is an opportunity for us to develop some money, and that might be the case, but you'd like to think we'd be able to convince him to stay after the year, or you bring him in on loan and you make sure you've got an option to buy in there, at least, even if the money's a little bit inflated. On the topic of not signing a centre-back or signing a centre-back, I think we would have brought Gabrielle in, and then it would have been, the rest of the summer would have been trying to flog one of either Michael Keane or Yerry Mina. And I think now they're in a position where they're not bringing him in. It's almost right, we won't bring in a centre-back, but if an offer comes in and we sell, then we will. I feel like there's not a necessity to do so, but if the opportunity comes up and someone comes in, Crystal Palace or Leicester comes in for Michael Keane, then I think, especially if it's over, £18 million, then I feel like, you accept that and you bring in the replacements for a similar price or a loan deal, but if an offer doesn't come in, then I wouldn't really be looking to sell. But then again, I think Michael Keane has 2 years left on his deal. So if you are going to sell and you are going to get decent money for him, it's probably now or next summer. You're probably looking 10 million tops, really.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that transpires. Certainly Chelsea have got too many centre-backs. Everton might need one, so we'll see if they can link up with Chelsea again, as they did with Kurt Zouma. But we'll move on to have a chat now about something a little bit different in regards to incomings. And I'm glad I've got both of you guys on again today, because I think we might have a bit of a good discussion on this, because I was listening to the Kickabout, Rob, that you did yesterday with Mike and Hannah, and it was, anyone who's not listened to that yet, go back and check it out. It was a really intriguing discussion on all kinds of things, including movies at the end as well, which, is always nice to get Rob's thoughts on those. But talk about the profile of players we brought in, and I don't really want to speak about the players themselves so much, because I think we've done that a lot this week, and we all sort of know what these lads can offer. But Mike, I've seen this week you've been having some interesting debates, I'd say. To be fair, all of them have been really interesting. There's no real stick or abuse being flying around, which has been good to see. But you sort of expressing some concerns about the age of Alan, who's 29, the age of Decore, who's 27. And I think we could probably put Santiago Arias and Alessandro Florenzi into this bracket as well, who are players who are in the late 20s. And as someone who's 31, I am at loath to sit here and say that we should write players off who are in the late 20s and say they're not physically capable. But we are where we are, and you sort of expressed your worries about going for that sort of profile of player, because Everton have done it before and it's not really worked.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that, age is not always a problem. It's not just in isolation, or you're signing old players and that's bad. Sometimes it's the context attached, and sometimes it's just the amount of older players you sign. Alan on his own would be all right. Arias on his own would be all right. Florenzi would be all right on his own. But you start stockpiling these players, and then they're all at a similar age, which means they all start to decline at a similar age, which means you then have to replace them at a similar time. And it's almost like, they might work for, especially Alan might work for 2-3 seasons. Florenzi, I'm not so sure about. I think he's had 2 ACL injuries since 2017. That alone puts me off, never mind his age. But you're starting to be in a position where if you're going to buy big money players, especially, I don't think Florenzi or Arias would cost that much money. But if you're signing a right back or a Seamus Coleman replacement, I want it to be a long-term solution now. Or if not, get a loan deal in and then prolong the situation and go again next summer. I think the fact is really, I think there's maybe a misconception, the fact that Everton need good players now, and that means signing players who are 28, 29, whereas you look at our actual good players at the moment, and Luca Dean's 27, but the rest, Richarlison's 23, Calvert-Lewin's 23, Holgate's 23. I suppose some people will look at that and go, all right then, but you need players to balance it out. But I think the evidence is there that you can sign young players, or you can sign players under 25, and they can have an instant impact. Where it's not a case of the Moise Keane where you bring him in and you've almost got to wait 12 months to have, bear any fruit almost.
Rob, what do you make of it? Obviously, you guys had an interesting discussion on the kick about in regards to this as well. And I have to say, I do agree with Mike in some senses, and I think that the area where I do really agree, and this is something I said on the weekly on Wednesday when we recorded it, is that I think if you're bringing in players who you're relying on to add a physical edge to Everton's play, and I think Decore and Alan, while they've got other attributes to the game, and they can both carry the ball, they're both technically proficient, you are bringing both of those players in to add energy, to add presence, to add aggression, to add tenacity to that midfield. And in an ideal world, I have to say, if you're bringing in players with those qualities, you're looking to add those qualities to the midfield, I'd want them to be a little bit younger, because we've seen in the past that players can get to a certain age, whether it be 30, 31, 32, 33, and all of a sudden the legs just go and they haven't got that dynamism anymore. And I'm not saying for any means that this is definitely going to happen with these lads if they rock up and wear the royal blue. But Alan has had niggling injuries over the past couple of seasons and has been in and out of the Napoli team as a result. Decore, albeit he's 2 years younger, has probably declined in the last couple of seasons at Watford as well. Am I wrong to be a little bit worried about that aspect of it in regards to the physicality side? Because if you take Decore's energy and his engine out of his play, and you take Alan's defensive awareness and tackling out of his play, I'm not entirely sure you've got much left.
Yeah. So if you're asking me, are there possibilities that these players come with potential flaws, or that something could happen? Sure. You buy them at a certain age, there's a risk that the physical part of their game begins to wear off. Sure. You can also buy a healthy 23-year-old from the Bundesliga who plays one game for you and then he's gone. I don't know. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But I think that where I come from in this discussion is really twofold. One is I think that there's a bit of a chicken or egg argument that is probably going on internally, because I think you have to acknowledge that we have Carlos Ancelotti now. I don't care what he says. I think the assumption that he'll be here in 4 or 5 years is really optimistic. I think two, the chicken or egg element of it all is, do you get to a place, do you bank on players who are still in their relative primes? You can argue if 27 or 29 is not anymore, but man, if they're completely useless at 29, then don't buy any players at all. I mean, my God. But having said that, I think that the chicken or egg part of that is, I think that what Ancelotti is banking on to a degree is the idea that we have to get back up, to a certain level in regards to where we finish in the league. We have to get into Europe. That will give us a platform to do more of the things that we want to do in terms of attracting certain types of players. Now, don't get me wrong. If you guys could tell me that, I think I said this before, but I want the youngest, most productive, cheapest player possible in every situation. But that's just not realistic in regard. I don't think it's realistic to think that you can do that every time, because yes, you can get young players quite easily if you want to. But if you want them of sufficient quality, they cost a certain amount. If you want to kind of take a bet that they're going to be productive, great. But in all likelihood, most players have a progression that takes a little time for them to evolve. Like Mike just mentioned, hey, we've got younger players that are productive. Why can't we get more of those? Well, let's be honest about those players. Richarlison is a young player who we paid almost 50 million for to come in. Now, sure, if there are Richarlisons out there, that's great, but they're going to cost a certain amount of money if they've shown any level of production in the Premier League. Calvert-Lewin toiled for a couple of years not scoring goals, and I still think he's got a ways to prove that he can replicate his current production for another season. He's young, sure, but right now, if you wanted to just go out and buy someone of Calvert-Lewin's age and production level, how much is that costing you? How much is a Holgate costing you right now? I mean, again, I think that the reason that there's this mindset that I have that you can mix and match the approach in terms of youth and age and mix it up a little bit is because there is more than one path and there is more than one need here. There is one need to get back to being competitive, but there is also a need, as Mike points out very astutely, to develop young players and assets. And you also have to be mindful of money. And I recognize all of those things, but I don't think we have this long runway to continue to field a super young team in every part of the field, in every part of the pitch, and bank on that totally working at this point. Now you can, if they're of sufficient quality, great, but I don't know that we have the money to go out and just get those players right now. Whereas you could potentially get some of these quote old players or older players at a particular price or for a short enough term or, as a bridge to the next few players. And by the way, this argument that, well, if we get 3 players that are of this age, we're going to have to replace them in 3 years. Well, guess what? You should be in a position where you are constantly churning that funnel throughout your club in terms of squad talent. You should be developing players. You should be acquiring young players who have time to develop for a few years because they have older players playing in those positions right now. And by the time those guys are ready to move on, the ideal club is one that can replace them with someone, with young options that they paid little money for to develop. But I think that right now, Everton feel like they can do both. They feel like we've got to sign players who have experience on bigger stages, who are going to come here and bring a little bit more grit and attitude and expectations. And frankly, we don't have players in our squad. I mean, you talk about Seamus Coleman bringing what he brings as a veteran, but he's never won anything. I think that there are players that you can bring in that can bridge us to that, while still also investing in young players like Moise Keane or like Jared Branthwaite, developing talent like we have with Calvert-Lewin or with Holgate. I think you can do both at the same time, but central midfield, and I know we've said it and I know it seems obvious, central midfield needs absolute production in some form or fashion next season. Not 3 seasons from now, I care about that, but we need to build some sort of platform for next season. And I am willing to take a short-term gamble in one part of the pitch and have a little bit more age in one part of the pitch in order to elevate everyone else on the rest of the pitch and the overall prospect of Everton in general.
Well, one of the things I've seen you saying, Mike, on Twitter over the last few days is that you're not entirely sure that Alan and Decore provide that, what Rob's mentioned there, in regards to bringing in players who are going to have an immediate impact on the team.
I mean, well, no, because I feel like when you sign an older player, I feel like Decore is probably out the pitch. 27's not old, but 29 onwards is. When you sign those players, I feel like you have to guarantee that they are going to make an immediate impact. And Alan might, he really might. I feel like if he will, though, I think you've got to, put him in a certain system where he's got people doing his running for him in a way, which means you would then need Decore, which is nearly £50 million on midfielders when you've already got Andre Gomez costing you 22, Gabamon costs similar, Delph cost 8, Sigurdsson cost 45. I think it's almost £150 million worth of centre mids. And then you're bringing in 2 more, which results in 150 million. But you're bringing in 2 midfielders that would need each other to be successful. And I just don't know whether that's the way to go, because if that backfires, we've almost, wasted more money when we didn't need to. Now, I think both of them could be really good players for us. Decore, especially because he's proven himself in the Premier League, and it'll be nice to have a midfielder who can score goals. He's not going to solve the defensive issues, I don't think. So you definitely need an Alan next to him. So you're then relying on him to adapt. And if he doesn't adapt, you're then left with a 29-year-old player who's more than likely going to be on big wages and he's cost you big money. And if you decide after 6 months that, all right, we need to see how much we can sell him for here, I don't think you're going to get a lot of money back. Whereas if you bring in a younger player and he doesn't work out, say like Moise Keane this year from the same league, it's not worked out at all. There's still promise there, and you can't really hope he kicks on next season, because I assume he's going to stay, barring something really weird happening. But if we decided to sell him now, we signed him for £27 million. You're probably going to get at least 25 million for that back, whereas Alan will sign for, I assume, a similar price, and you're probably looking at half of that back. And I don't think, considering the club are looking on building a stadium in a couple of years, we've seen the impact that had on Tottenham's transfer budget and sign players for 18 months. But they were in a position where they could do that because they had a young squad and they bought young players, whereas, albeit, it had, the consequential effects on Pochettino and the squad overall, because, it wasn't refreshed. There wasn't any dramatic need to buy new players because they bought young and they grew together. Whereas in 3 years' time, I hope, like Rob said, you'll sign these players and we'll also sign a few 18, 19-year-olds. Whereas when Alan does, start to fade away a little bit, whoever that 18, 19-year-old is, whether he's bought in or whether he came up from the academy, they can just ease into that position, and it's there's no change and there's no, dramatic expense. But I fear that, as much as I understand why the club will want to, buy short term now, I said the other day, it's like, if you're building for the long term by buying short term, so you can build long term. If you get me, it's a lot of terms in there.
No, I know what you mean.
I feel like maybe Brands and Ancelotti have maybe had a discussion or a bit of a reality check, whereas they want to do a certain thing. They want to buy young, hungry, really high potential players. They want to have squads full of Richarlisons, whereas, you know, you look at Leicester, the likes of Maguire went last year for 75 million. Chilwell looks like he's going to go for around 60 million. If Maddison went, you're probably talking a similar fee. You want a squad of those players. But the fact is, Leicester have been able to create that squad because, I doubt any Leicester fans are listening to this, but the pressure for Everton to succeed is a lot greater for Leicester to succeed. Whereas, you know, there's probably a bit more patience around Leicester fans and being, okay, we'll buy this player, and if he doesn't do okay for the first 12 months, that's okay, because we know in 18 months he's going to be fantastic. But Everton want to be back in Europe, and we want to be, you know, on those horrible away trips to AZ Alkmaar and stuff like that every season. Yeah. So I think it might be a case of, let's build short term for 2 seasons. Let's get into Europe. Let's maintain Europe. Let's become the best of the rest again. And then we'll start building like we start and we'll, like we did, you know, previously, and we'll start signing more Richarlisons, and we'll start signing more Moise Keanes, and we'll start signing more Jared Brantwaite. I think it's just maybe, as much as it could backfire, and it's not necessarily the route I'd go down, I understand it. And I feel like it's just about getting to the position where, and I feel like it you know, reaffirms my point that Ancelotti is here not to win trophies as much as everyone would like him to, because the likelihood is, you know, there's only 3 trophies to win. Let's be honest, and the Premier League's not, you know, the probability isn't high, but what he can do is set the tone, and he can set the precedent. And then when he doesn't build, he can grow again, if you get me.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's quite a hard, you know, these 2 horses have like approaches like quite hard to straddle at the same time, aren't they? It's really difficult because in one sense you want to sit here and say you have full support in the recruitment team, and you know, in one sense you can't say, well, we should never sign a player over the age of 29 because he might not have a selling value, because players have come into clubs at that age and done really well. But I think there's this inherent unease and lack of trust I've got in the current recruitment process at Everton that makes me think every time we sign a player of that age that it's going to go wrong. And I think that's something maybe I need to get over, and maybe, you know, we all need to get over. Sorry, Ron, go on.
Yeah, no, Matt, I get that PTSD from what we've dealt with. But you know, I don't mean to be a Brands apologist, because he certainly had his share of mistakes, but I also kind of think that, you know, I think Gabaman was generally the right decision that just, you know, got the worst possible luck. I think that you could argue that when Yerry Mina's played, he's been pretty good, but he's been injured too much. Like, there are certain things that, you know, especially when you're buying players who were relatively healthy before, and then they come to your club and this stuff happens, it compromises things. But look, I use this analogy sometimes when we're talking, Matt, because you watch this sport, but I think that the terms of these sorts of deals matter too. You know, whether it's a low fee or wages that you don't love, but are only committal for a few years, as opposed to like a 5-year deal. You know, for instance, we talked during COVID about, or you know, COVID's still happening, but we talked a lot about how it'll be interesting to see how some of these contracts are structured for some of these older players or more mid-tier players that come in. But you know, we've talked before, Matt, about you know, using the NFL as an analogy at times. Like, I was thinking recently about how you know, I'm a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. They have built most of the talent on their squad through the draft, which is just, Michael, that's just their way of developing young talent, cheap, you know, all those things that you talk about.
Do you watch the NFL, Mike?
No.
Well, the analogy. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Mike.
I sometimes watch it, but it's it's never something I've been able to fully engross myself in, really.
I'll tell you what, mate, if you keep doing podcasts with me and Rob every week, you'll be into it too, because we do nothing else but talk. Rob has an NFL analogy every single week for one of these things. So.
Well, you know why? Because it's our biggest sport over here. There's 11 guys on the field, per team each time. When they're, it's 22 guys on the field every moment. And so I think it's ready made for those analogies. But what I was going to say was the Cowboys have developed the core of their team through the draft. Okay. They've had, middling success with that. They've had some bad injury luck, what have you. But what they've done is they've also, in this offseason and previous off seasons, what they do, like every NFL team does, is they acknowledge the fact that they can't take the exact same approach to every positional level in their squad, right? Because if you have drafted well in your offensive line, your running back, your quarterback, great. But you may be in a position right now where, for whatever reason, you've got a hole in the defensive line, or you've got a hole at strong safety or something like that. And you don't get to just draft as many players as you want, and you can't just sign anyone you want. So sometimes the best thing you can do is to acknowledge that sometimes stopgaps work. And if you have an opportunity to get a high impact player who will only be a high impact player for you for the short term, that's fine, because if it gets you where you ultimately want to go, it augments the good things that you've done in other parts of the pitch. With Everton, look, as bad as we all feel like things are, I still maintain that even an average midfield would have seen us finish maybe 4 places higher last season. I mean, that's how bad it was. We had 2 double-digit goal scorers. We've got good pedigree at center half. I think that the idea here is, let's find a way to maximize the productivity of our attacking players, our defensive players, by having a midfield that's competent, at least. Even if, you don't have to tell me that Allen and Doucouré are going to revolutionize midfield play, but if they can at least get us to a point of competence in terms of our performances and get the most out of them, even for a season or so, which buys us more time, hopefully, to develop younger players, acquire young talent for Brands to do the things he wants to do. I guess I'm amenable to that, because I would love a world where everyone is young and everyone is talented and everyone's great, but that's not the way it always works, especially, and this was kind of the thing I was talking about was sort of twofold. The second fold here is that we need to acknowledge what kind of proposition Everton currently are. We are a mid-table team without Europe to offer. It's not as easy to get to just snap our fingers and solve some of these problems. And so some of that creativity is, yes, buying young players, but it's also getting the most out of what you currently have. And sometimes getting the most out of what you currently have at the club is augmenting with some shorter term solutions, at least that you hope will work. And the final point I'll make on that is that if Everton can get to a place where we can compete for Europe, that gives us a better chance to also retain the good players we do have. And as much as everyone wants to say they're all terrible, we have some good players that we want. I think the Richarlison thing is also, by the way, the big elephant in the room too, guys. We're going to have him for, I would bet on this season, and he's probably going to want to move on, right?
Yeah, he said as much, hasn't he? Yeah,
he said as much. So because if you look, Richarlison had to be, you think about Calvert-Lewin and him, they were beating their heads against the wall most weeks, just trying to get 1 or 2 opportunities to maybe score every week. And it was tough. And it was really, really, really a challenge for them. I don't think they want another season like that, but Richarlison, I think if Richarlison is going to go after the season, which he probably will, I want Richarlison to have the best damn season that he possibly can, because I want to maximize the value. As much as we talk about all of the assets that a club has to ultimately sell, that's going to be our big poker chip. And it needs to be as valuable as possible. Richarlison needs to get into those goal scoring heights, and it's going to hurt when he leaves, but man, it's going to get us the kind of fee that we can use to build upon. And I know that sounds sad and it sounds a little cynical, but you can't, people are asking me to be realistic about, the sell on value and those sorts of things. But part of sell on value is also maximizing the assets you currently have. And Richarlison and Calvert-Lewin and Holgate to a degree as well, those sorts of guys, everyone becomes a more valuable asset that you already have if you can improve them with some other additions. Even if it's just 1 or 2 years, it can be transformative in terms of the fortunes of the club. And again, I'm not saying we're going to go to Champions League next year, but man, if we could just get to Europe in some, hell or come high water, I think we're going to have a better opportunity to recruit both financially and in terms of attractiveness next summer.
Just quickly before we finish, I'll rattle through some of the comments we've had on YouTube. Cheers to everyone for getting involved tonight. Steve Kelly has said fans were against buying players for lots of money and high wages. Decore coming in for 30 million and biggest player. I'm not sure where that's come from. Maybe some reports today about that. I don't know. But saying, and everyone is happy about that now. David Masson has said if we don't sell any of the main three centre halves, I would not worry too much. Let's get the creativity and solidify midfield first, then spend big on a centre half next summer. That's what the Reds did. Live Vida said, is anyone old enough to remember the last time we played Spurs in the opening game? And then said it was the 1984-85 season. But didn't we play Tottenham in Ronald Koeman's first season?
Yeah, we did. And West Brom as well.
Yeah.
First 2 games were Spurs, West Brom, weren't they? So that's the same this year.
Yeah, and we were 7th that season, so...
Yeah, 61 points.
We'd take that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey, Matt, I was just going to say, if we want to break some news here, we've got apparently Leighton Baines is going to be taking some sort of yet to be defined coaching role at Everton. So
I thought you were going to say he's coming out of retirement then, Rob.
Well, but you know what? Once he's committed himself to be some sort of coach like that, at least in this first year, I feel like if we have some real crisis at left back, he'll put the shirt back on if we absolutely need him to.
He'll do Paul Scholes.
That's right.
yeah. Get him in midfield, like Scholes did. Steve Kelly, what Michael's saying is right. 1 or 2 is fine. I'm assuming he means players of an older vintage there. Buying 4 or 5 isn't good. Adam Galloway saying all these players linked. I just want some players that I like. In Moyes teams, I could name 7 or 8 players guaranteed every season that I like and care about. This team, I like maybe 4 or 5 players.
That's a lot of hindsight is 2020, isn't it? I think we properly hated some of those guys, and now we look at those old YouTube clips and we really love. Oh man, I love those guys. I don't know if we really felt that way, but okay.
Live Vid, who I accidentally thought was a red on one of our videos recently, and I apologise profusely, and I'll do it again. He said, absolutely correct from our friend from the USA. Look what Gary McAllister did for Liverpool when they won the treble in his latter years. The thing about that is, though, he was all about technical ability and awareness and being a very cerebral footballer. And he came into a solid defensive setup that they had under Houllier and just sort of slotted in, had a bit of gloss. He wasn't someone that was brought in for his physicality and to get up and down the pitch. And I think that's maybe where it's a little bit different with people like Alan and Decore. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, Mike. It's sort of a bit like what Wolves have done with Moutinho, and everyone sort of thought, well, he's 33, 34 now, but he's a player who can't really run anymore, but he's added a sprinkle and a class to a solid setup.
Well, yeah, Moutinho was actually an example I was thinking of this morning, because I was thinking of how many older players. Well, Alan's not that old; he's only 29. Let's be honest, compared to Moutinho. But Moutinho plays in a system where, let's be honest, Wolves, for 20, 25 of their games, they're sitting deep, they're narrowing the spaces, and whereas Everton, especially at home, a lot of the games can get quite stretched. Whereas Wolves almost minimise the amount of running Moutinho's got to do. And if we went down a similar route, then that's all right. I don't think Ancelotti is the most, of attacking managers. I feel like he can be. And I think we've seen it. If he needs to be conservative, he will be. And I think we will see that a lot more often. Everyone talks about his game management, and I think it's going to be so. I'm going to be so grateful of having a manager where we go 1-0 up in games, and I think we can have a bit of confidence, especially away from home. That will at least take a point. I think another example I want to talk about, because I've had it thrown at me quite a bit on Twitter. Two of them actually. One of them being Kevin De Bruyne being the same age as Alan, and me saying, well, if you don't want Alan, would you not want Kevin De Bruyne? In the world. One of them is the best players in the world. And the other is Gareth Barry, who we signed, I think he was 32, 33. I think the comparison in terms of players, they're actually, quite similar players, but Barry had 15 years experience playing in the Premier League when we signed him. Alan's played in Italy since 2012, and being, a top-class midfielder in Italy is a lot different to being a top-class midfielder in the Premier League, simply because, the speed of the game is so much different. I'm acting like I'm speaking from experience here, but
I was going to say, we didn't have Everton's academy, mate. Yeah.
Well, and by the way, Mike makes a good point about we've seen it firsthand. Players coming from other leagues, you just never know. Sometimes they come in and they're awesome and it's no problem, and sometimes they're not. And I think that. But I also think that if you're going to use that logic, then if we're saying, well, why don't we buy a 21-year-old player from Germany or Italy or what? I mean, they're all
risks.
They're all risk. And then you're making the development argument with them that you're okay with them developing for a few years, but you need the difference, of course, to Mike's point, is that Alan needs to be able to produce right away. And so I come back to this, and I'm not trying to shut down the conversation with something as simplistic as, well, if Carlo rates him, then that's all that matters. I'm not saying that that's all that matters, but because I think that stifles discussion. And I think that even someone like Carlo Ancelotti, his decisions, his evaluation of players is certainly up for discussion. Having said that, we all said quite often, I remember when he was appointed, that this is a guy who is one of the best managers ever and has certainly his knowledge, experience, his eye for talent, having coached some of the best players and been around some of the best players. That's got to be worth something, right? So I suppose that we have to a degree, trust that he's spent, more time than any of us have at this point around this collection of players and seen firsthand, day in and day out, where the deficiencies are. And, he probably, and this is the other thing I think we don't always take into account, especially when we go back to him talking about an evolution of the club. Remember that comment that he made at that presser about an evolution this summer? I think part of that too is, as much as, and I do find, especially the work that Mike does and others do on the statistical front, to be incredibly important. I think that we can all agree that certain players, if you want to use the Gareth Barry as an example, their numbers didn't always flatter them in terms of how you evaluated them from a pure metric standpoint, but the sum of their parts was of a greater impact than any of us probably expected. I remember being completely underwhelmed by the idea of Gareth Barry when he came in.
Me too.
Was really liked him. So I do wonder if part of his calculation, Carlos' calculation of especially a guy like Alan, or potentially another player that he is familiar with or that Brands is familiar with, bringing those guys in is beyond just the pure raw skill set and specific production, even though that's clearly important. But I wonder if he also thinks we need an injection of these sorts of personalities into the squad. We need some level raising in terms of expectations, because no one at the club right now, even our most seasoned players, I mean, God, I hate to say this, even if we're talking about Leighton Baines, who's my favorite player ever, none of them can look at any of these guys and tell them what it's like to have been in these particular types of huge games and these particular types of trophy winning scenarios. And I'm not talking about winning mentality, but I am talking about the idea that this team is full of unlikable. It's a weird combination that it's a squad that is at one point both nice and unlikable all at once, which seems weird to say, but it's hard to like this group as a whole, even though you like some of the characters, and it's hard to feel like they're doing enough at times. He may just be bringing in some real bastards. Maybe that's part of it. But I think it's also just the idea of bringing in players maybe that, for a cerebral guy like Carlo, who thinks these are the kinds of personalities and mindsets that I need to bring in to help me get where I need to go, as well as to kind of fill in the gap where we have some specific weaknesses. And I guess I can't speak to Decore. I mean, whatever, but he's got Premier League experience, but I guess I would assume that Carlo has some definitive ideas about what is needed. And we probably have to give him, at least early on, a little benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
I love Carlo's calculation there, Robert. Just had an image of him with whiteboard and blackboard rather, and chalk, just sort of going through all these players like an old school professor sort of style.
He's got those glasses on, and he's got that neat turtleneck on, and he's just kind of Carlo's. Look, all I know is that whatever Carlo is doing, whatever Carlo is doing, if he applies the same mindset to his weight loss and fitness and the handsomeness improvements he's been making, then if he can apply that same mentality to player recruitment, guys, then we're in for a better season than we expect.
Yeah. Fingers crossed he does. Anyway, we are out of time today. We come to the hour mark, but really interesting stuff. Thanks very much to Rob. Thanks very much to Mike as well. Hope everybody's enjoyed the stream on YouTube. Thanks for everybody for getting involved. Sorry we couldn't get through all the comments. There's absolutely tons, but we will be back again next week to have a chat about transfers as well. Hopefully Everton will actually have a player through the door by then that we can speak about, and we can stop talking about how people who are 27 are old.
I know he's going to be 30 by the time he signs. So.
Dear me. But yeah, that's been your transfer show. Thanks very much for listening. I'm going to speak to you again soon.
That's good.
Yeah.